So go there, make yourself available,
Yeah.
do the job, but let not money be your primary focus because you want to grow. You are looking for an entry point. Man, I'm happy to have you guys here today. Of course, this is not planned in any way, but we're just gonna roll with the flow and hopefully we'll have a good conversation that somehow will be helpful to other folks like us here in Finland.
Yeah.
But before we get this started, just as a word of introduction, right, so that our viewers will be able to identify us, if we could just give a little bit of intro about ourselves. Maybe I'll start with you, Reggie.
Okay. So hi everyone, I'm Reggie Rusan. Originally from the U.S. Been in Finland in and out since 2000 actually. So it's been quite a while. Been living here continuously for about the last 8 years. Part of which I was splitting time with in Brussels. I tell everyone I came here for the food and weather. No one believes me. But I actually used to work for one of Finland's largest companies called Kone as their global head of IT operations. And currently I'm the CTO for a Finnish IT company called E-Systems. And in between those, I had my own company called Simple Tech Solutions for 3-4 years. And it's still semi-active, but it hasn't been very active over the last year and a half. Been in enterprise IT for over 30 years, and now trying to help Finnish companies at the enterprise level, both in the startups as well, to help bring business value through the use of the data that they have. So, and quite passionate about lots of things around entrepreneurs, internationals in Finland, and actually the well-being of people like us as well as everybody.
Right.
Excellent. So my name is Kingsley Ify. So in Nigeria, currently leading a platform called Springboard, the African Nordic business platform. So we basically have Finnish Nordic companies that are interested in African market. And beside that, I have other interests as well, which is leading me to something that I'm really intrinsically drawn to, which is health and fitness. So I'm going to talk about health and fitness. I look at it from the holistic view. So not just how we look, so looking at it from the physical, the mental, and the psychological aspect. So that is also an area that I'm looking at exploiting. So basically, Troy, maybe you have to also just give us a little bit of intro about yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Troy Woodson. I'm originally from New York City, from the Bronx, though I lived most of my professional life in Brooklyn. So born and raised in the Bronx in the 1970s, and my background is very interesting in terms of how I kind of got into like corporate stuff, business, where I was kind of living in the shadow of pretty dangerous area. And during the 70s and 80s, I was interested in going into business, inspired actually by the movie Wall Street.
Okay.
So when I saw the movie Wall Street, I was like, wow, I want to be like that. But I don't know how do I get from where I'm at right now to there? And not saying that I've ever gotten to that level, but what I will say is that inspired me to get into an internship program that sponsored me in sales and marketing for 4 years while I was in college. And during that time, I learned how to sell. But more than knowing how to sell a product, I learned how to sell myself. But from that internship, college, worked for several different corporations like Xerox, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, working primarily enterprise accounts, until the world fell apart around 2007, 2008. And then I found myself, trying to pick myself up. And during that very vulnerable time, I met a woman from a country that I didn't know much about. And of course, it's the only thing I knew about Finland. Seriously, the only thing I knew about Finland at that time was Finlandia vodka and Finlandia cheese.
Whoa.
So that says a lot already.
It was more than that.
Yo.
Until I started working for Kone, of course.
Yeah. So, Reg, you always say that, how did you get to Finland? For the food and the weather.
Yeah.
Saying that's what I always say, for the food and the weather. But it started with a woman. So when I met my future ex-wife, I never knew much about the country, but when fell in love, the whole story, and before I knew it, had a kid on my way to Finland in 2010. And when I first got here, went to the unemployment office, first stop for a lot of immigrants. And they told I gave them my CV. I was like, hey, check out what I used to do back in the days. They were like, okay, that's good, but you have to learn the language. And once you learn the language, we can get you a job. I was like, okay, maybe a job at Nokia. They were like, you can get a job as a cleaner or drive a bus once you learn Finnish.
Wow.
And they told me that bus drivers make really nice money. They make like 3,000 euros a month. I was like, okay,
Interesting.
So I set about being, an entrepreneur, kind of like a reluctant entrepreneur, because I was always a company man. Like similar to you, Reg, working with Kone, I work with these different companies. But as you know, and we're going to hear your story hopefully more. Like I was thrown into entrepreneurship first, as a freelance English teacher, and then I started my own sales consultancy. And through that sales consultancy, I started working with like up to 200 different startups and growth companies here. And that was kind of like my way into, to the startup world, which ultimately led to, to director roles at a couple of different companies prior to the pandemic. And right now I'm working as a director of customer acquisitions at Feedbackly, where I head their sales and marketing programs, and I'm helping them achieve repeatable and scalable growth as we make a big push towards the North American market. Plug there. But yeah,
Excellent, Ron. That was really good. So with that in mind, I don't know, I think if someone that is listening, for example, have you learned something specifically that you think you could share for people like us, primarily living here in Finland, that could be helpful to someone, based on your experience?
I'm looking at you, Reg.
Oh. I by no means have this cracked, but I would focus on the point that you raised, that you were a reluctant entrepreneur. I too became an entrepreneur somewhat reluctantly. I'd been a corporate guy for many years, and I took a couple of years off when I relocated to Finland, left Kone, and to be with my young son at the time, because I had been traveling way too much before then, and needed to start building that relationship with him. And I thought, well, okay, I'll try to do some investing, and if that doesn't go well, I'll just go back to work for one of the bigger companies here. And so lo and behold, I wasn't a great investor and had to go back to work, and started, answering, opening positions for sort of senior IT leaders, because that's, what I was. And I saw that, if I put in answered a call from outside of Finland, I was getting CIO level positions and head of this and head of that. And in Finland, they were not returning even or answering my CV that I submitted. Not even a rejection. So in best case, I would get a rejection. In a couple cases, I came second to some very well qualified Finnish people. And in the IT industry, it's not as important to have Finnish language, but it definitely helps. And I don't have that. But that clearly wasn't why I wasn't getting any positions and wasn't getting any callbacks. And I had already had 15 years experience with the #1 Finnish company. So it wasn't that I didn't have a work history with the Finnish company. And kind of answering to the C-suite, so quite senior level. So there was none of these sort of challenges on whether or not my CV matched the criteria for the positions that I was applying for. And in most cases, if I did get a response, I was overqualified, which would be hard not to be, because if you're working for the #1 company, then few environments are sort of this big. So I kind of learned that it's difficult for Finns to hire or buy from people they really don't know, and I had no real network here outside of my network that I had at Kone, because I actually never worked for the Kone Finnish organization. I worked in the U.S., in London, and in Brussels. And so I had deep networks in those areas, but in the Finnish network, when I came here, I was primarily focused on my IT team and the C-suite that was here. So in my Finnish network was nothing. And so then I decided, well, I need to start a company, because I can help companies do things around GDPR, which was also hitting at that time around 2017, 2018. And through kind of talking with you, you set me on the path of you need to build your network. And so the two things I would tell people like us is that is a path that you can follow here.
Yeah.
It is easier for people to hire you as a consultant than it is to actually hire you as a direct employee. But still, none of that happens if they don't know who you are.
Right?
Yeah.
Your network is your net worth.
Yeah.
I think you said that first.
Yeah. So I stole it from somewhere. So, but that's the sort of the message. I mean, and that's just on covering the base level of sort of needs, which gainful employment is at the lowest level. It's part of your security.
Right.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I totally agree with everything that Reg said in terms of deepening your network through connections, and the way that happens is actually one relationship at a time.
Yeah.
My particular story was just continuing from when they said that I could be a cleaner or drive a bus. I was like, well, I could, as my mom used to say, I can do bad by myself. So I actually went onto LinkedIn and I started to, basically I put in like Finnish investors, and different organizations came up, different individuals. And I literally started reaching out to each one of these individuals to try to get some insight. I wasn't really even sure what I was going to do beyond just being a freelance English teacher, but I wanted to do something else more. And that path led to me meeting, hundreds of people who began to actually, inspire me to do some other stuff. And that was actually my gateway into like working in the startup world. Because first it was like this broad search for just like Finnish business people, Finnish investors. And then as I started to meet people, those people started to connect me to other people based upon my background. So, the advice that I would give anyone who's coming to this country or having some issues trying to find work is that, don't narrow yourself, to just being an employee. And as Reggie was talking about, consultancy, is a viable option because again, just to second what he was saying, folks are much more willing to hire consultants because they can, even if you have a particular, if you have a particular knowledge in a particular industry, you can also leverage your culture. So if you come from a different, if you come from, Nigeria, Kenya, China, or wherever, those markets are ripe markets for opportunity, and Finnish companies that are looking to scale and looking to grow, they can leverage your intelligence to be able to scale to those markets.
Yeah, and local network.
Local network, exactly.
Yeah, speaking about that, I think what Reggie said about Finns not actually interested in hiring people that they don't know.
Yeah.
Myself, I can relate to that very clearly. And then, of course, you talked about network and how important it is to actually network and get yourself out there to know people, and from there you can build on that. I think these are two relevant points that myself can relate to.
Yeah.
I normally tell the guys that I come across here, even the ones that I know or I see, I meet them in the gym or they just talking to me about issue relating to succeed or to do something in Finland. There is two things that I normally highlight. So which is the insight you have,
Right.
and then the network. So the insight meaning what you know, the knowledge you have, right? You need to know that as much as that is relevant, it's not enough to just, know something, be qualified for something, but more importantly, even outside Finland, but more here in Finland as black people, as an African, I don't know how. I think there could be, difference in terms of how they perceive Africans and then the people from African Americans. So there might be, I don't know, but
that's an interesting one.
Yeah,
open up that can of worms.
Yeah. there might be just a little, but
So basically, I normally tell them, like, you have to be able to network. So you go outside, you try to meet people and try to broaden your scope of thinking, because your thinking actually manifests the life that you live. So whatever it is that you're thinking. I'm not saying it's easy to do, but it's just, for me, it's a way to say, these are the things that I tried myself and it might work for someone else. And then also to add to that, when we talk about doing the odd jobs here in Finland, for some people that might also be an entry point. And this is why. So if you look at some of the biggest companies here, for example, if you there's one of the biggest Finnish cleaning company, Lassila. So the CEO, the current CEO, if you listen to that guy's story, he started scrubbing the floor. So one thing that I used to tell these guys, everything is go. You have to set a goal. If you are going there to just say, I want to go and clean floor to make money, you are doomed, right? But if you're going with the attitude that, okay, I want to create some value, right? That is already a different way, different approach. Don't go there and say, do you know who I am? Or they give you a job and they are thinking, I shouldn't be here after all. I have my BSc, I have my certificate, I'm well more intelligent than you and all that kind of stuff. That's not going to help you.
No, it didn't help me at the TE.
Exactly. So go there, make yourself available, do the job, but let not money be your primary focus because you want to grow. You are looking for an entry point. Okay? So you go in there to help, to let people see that you're valuable to them. And when that happens, right, they will open up to you, and that is opportunity that you should be clever enough to explore. So you begin to take that step because they see you as a valuable asset, right? They're going to teach you. From scrubbing the floor, you become a supervisor. From supervisor, you begin to climb. And before you know it, right? And even if they don't recognize your effort and what you're putting in, the fact that they're able to show you and expose you to so many different structures and how things are working there, that is already a skill that you can take away and make use of it. So these are my advice. Don't go and come. Don't go to the places and be, showing them that I shouldn't. Because if you have some sort of, let's say, if you're interested in any hobby or you have some talent, don't just, like when I talk about fitness and stuff, it's not, for me, it's not just about, let me show you that I have muscle or I can run. Look for ways to monetize. Talk to people around you, build a network of, really interesting people that can help you make progress, because that's the only way you're going to grow. So these are the kind of, the discussion I have with folks around. And I think that, of course, we need to also collectively look at a way where we can, put these ideas together so that we can help ourselves make progress in Finland.
I have a question. Do you think you can inspire that fire in people, or do you think people should have it like that?
Yeah, I think it varies. It's hard to actually force people to move if they're not ready to move. But what I also realize is that there's a lot of us here that simply don't know enough. and then also we are not willing or simply confused and don't even know how to start.
Yeah.
So, and that is why I think this kind of discussion will be very valuable.
Yeah.
Because once we start having this kind of discussion and having a platform where, you know, people like us can actually, you know, have a place, a point of sort of reference where they can go and say, hey, I'm struggling with this, I need that help, I need this help.
Yeah.
I think from that, you know, little by little, gradually we can begin to see, you know, progress and then we can help each other grow.
Yeah, each one teach one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, I think that's really important, that we all need to help ourselves.
Yeah.
And I mean,
one. I like that.
and so I mean, you and I have looked at a couple of things, and you know, one of the things that I hear constantly is that I don't mind who I work with, and I really don't. Right? I think we all need to work together, especially those of us in the diaspora. Whatever sort of issue you might have had in even your own home country,
Right.
it's not enough of us to have those sort of issues here. We have to, you know, to come together. And one of the things I think that internationals need to understand is how much impact we have on the economy here. And it's not often talked about. I always talk about there's 10,000 immigrant entrepreneurs in Finland. We're the fastest growing segment in the country. We represent over 3.5 billion in revenue every year. That is a huge number.
Yeah.
And we can't forget that this is the impact we bring to this country. Not that the country owes us anything, but the fact that we are bringing value, because that's not the message that we always get. And because, you know, you had your business going, Troy had his, I had mine, we know how to help other people start their business. And quite frankly, I see it almost as it's my responsibility to help others.
Absolutely.
At least share the knowledge that I have. Again, I don't have it solved, but here's what I do know, and if you can take that, add something to it, and go further, that's excellent.
Yeah.
The only thing I would ask is that you pull the next person along with you.
Exactly.
So you don't forget that everybody needs some assistance at some point in time.
Definitely.
This idea of paying it forward.
Yeah.
You know, it's very valuable, because if someone helps you, then it's almost incumbent upon you to extend help.
Yeah.
You know, and so on and so forth. Because I tend to think that it comes back to you.
Yeah.
Exponentially. Yeah.
I also, this is really, you know, I get fired up with this kind of discussions, you know, because this is something that I'm, more than anything else, I want to see people succeed.
Yeah.
Like you said, one teach one, you know, each one teach one, right?
Yes, sir.
And that's how, if you look at our existence as Black people, our social network, you know, is so important. It just, I mean, I can't emphasize enough how important it is for us to come together to actually begin to, you know, help ourselves. Of course, people talk about how we are treated not, you know, not nice, or how we are, you know, the issue of racism and all that kind of stuff, which myself I've experienced it in so many different levels. But I also know, just referring to the comment that you make, like how do I react to those situations myself. I've also realized that I have to be responsible to my attitude towards the goal that I set for myself. So I'm not willing, and I know it's going to be counterproductive for me to just sit and whine and complain. It has always been to outwork these people and try to always do my best, whether they recognize it or not.
Right.
It doesn't really matter. Just try to make sure, because I you know, they talk about success, succeeding, and all that kind of stuff. So there's also a way that I look at this, you know, success.
Right.
So you can succeed career-wise, but on personal level also, that's a different kind of definition, right?
Yes.
So all these things I've been, I've taken my time to say, okay, I look back to where I came from. What are the things that push me out of Nigeria, out of my country? What are those things that I really, really cherish? And what then do I want to make out of my life?
Mm.
Those are the things that pushes me on a daily basis. Those are the things that make me to get up every morning to say, I want to do this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter how hard it is, even if my back is pushed behind the wall,
Yeah.
I keep fighting because I'm fighting for myself.
Right.
And most importantly, if there's any way I could, add something to someone, whether it is information, I'm just so happy to do that.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
That's what's up.
So, what have your experience been here in Finland?
It's been a mixed experience.
Yeah.
I'd say all in all, it's been a really positive experience.
Okay.
Of course, that it took a long time for me to get to the point where I can say that it's positive, because we had some bumps along the way. I mean, when I got here, and certainly probably when you got here, because you've been here almost double the time.
Yeah.
We were living in Balila, and when I started off working as a freelance English teacher, I had to get on the tram in Balila and go towards my destination. But invariably, once or twice a week, I would get called the N-word.
Wow.
And typically, it was usually someone who was drunk, or they just looked like they were not, they weren't doing okay. But it still hurt. It still bothered me.
Sure.
And the fact that the expectation was that I don't react to it. At least the folks that I had spoken to at that time was like, don't react to it, you're better than that. But at the same time, that still cut pretty deep. And and I realized that while that sort of outward racism is not as prevalent now as it was then, that doesn't mean it's gone. And that certainly doesn't mean that sort of racism and is not something that people are experiencing, maybe not outwardly, but perhaps they're experiencing it when they are applying for work. Perhaps they're experiencing an institutional form of racism whereby their options are set for them when they do go to certain employment agencies where they are slated to be cleaners, bus drivers, or healthcare workers. So I think that those things are certainly a part of my experience. But those things, while they were negative, those were the things that actually had to happen to inspire the things that later came from it. Because when I got called those names, and when my options were limited for me in the TE office, I was inspired by that. Because I grew up as an African American, Black American growing up in the States. My mom always told me that I gotta work twice as hard to get half the recognition. So that was no different. And I'm sure you may have heard the same type of thing. So for me, when those things happened, I was like, game on. I could be a cleaner, I could drive a bus, you're gonna call me the N-word once or twice a week? Okay. Now let's see what I can do. And what I did was I humbled myself. And while I couldn't be a cleaner or drive a bus, primarily because I can barely keep my own apartment clean, let alone trying to clean up somebody else's place.
Driving as well.
Yeah, I'm not a good driver at all. I haven't driven in over a decade. But I did humble myself. So, and I took a job as a freelance English teacher, which, being like a corporate sales guy making over six figures in the States was like, okay, I'm gonna teach English to finish adults. So I felt like it was a step back, but it was a step back in the right direction.
Sure.
Because it allowed me to humble myself and realize that, okay, this is where I'm at. I have to completely re-career. I have to lay blank any idea that I had of myself. So essentially I had to kill my idea of myself in order to find something else, in order to begin to put those entrepreneurial aspirations into effect through those meetings that I was having with people, I had to essentially kill what I thought of myself to be able to say, hey, you know what? Maybe I can go into sales consultancy. Maybe I can have my own business. Maybe I can be a consultant. Because that opened up a world of opportunity that I'd never seen before. And it all started, at least for me, with those negative experiences.
Excellent. So,
I haven't had as many of the negative experiences from the, I would say, the name calling and the more visible side of racism. I have run into a little bit of the institutionalized racism when we talked about job applications. But what's more important to me is when I see that happening to my son, and even at an early age in preschool, where something will happen and all of a sudden there needs to be a report where it gets written up that there's a certain behavioral issue, or maybe, although he's one of the brightest and best readers, but maybe there's a little lack of advancement in this area. We want to focus completely on those sort of things. And then you come to find out that lots of let's say kids of mixed race or of African descent or just non-finished descents are pushed into career paths that aren't as fruitful as some of the other career paths.
Right.
And that sort of institutionalized racism, I think, is a little bit more important than what the sort of visible or the verbal sort of name calling. But I think overall, the thing that we were talking about actually before we started the podcast is that impact on one's well-being is probably more important than I'm talking.
Yes.
And so over time, that pressure and that stress can crack even the best of us. And we've seen cases of that happen very recently, and that, I think, you kind of started out with that. You're moving into this well-being area through fitness and taking care of the whole person. I think that we need to make sure that there's facilities for the international community, including the diaspora and everyone else. It's funny. There's a fantastic group here called the International Working Women of Finland. They are 5,000 strong. They have programs that, from teaching women how to ride bikes to making major network sessions that allow access to international working women of Finland. They actually approached myself and a couple other guys to start the International Working Men of Finland group, and because they wanted to include us and it was a great idea. We started it. We were coming in full partnership with them. In support of the activities that they had on, and diversity and inclusion does include men as well, and especially men of international descent. We need sometimes different services, and it was really strange that when we announced ourselves, we got basically lots of hate and venom. People were like, "Why do you need a support group?"
Right.
As men, you've had the life thrown to you. Well, that might be true for non-internationals.
Sure.
Right? But there's certain support that we need to help each other be, mentally fit, to increase our network, to do all of these other things to be a fruitful part of society.
Sure.
And we basically shut ourselves down because a lot of the board members were even told by their customers and their people that supported their programs that we can't support you if you're part of a group called the International Working Men of Finland.
Wow.
Okay. And that's the sort of institutionalized ism that I think we need to start striking out. We all need support.
Yeah.
And sometimes we need very specific support, like the International Working Women of Finland. I can listen and maybe understand a little bit of what happens in sort of Me Too situations, but I can't know that like women can. I'm not going to be able to provide services that attack that problem the way they would be able to do for themselves. And although we don't face that issue, we face other issues. Because men are attacked in different ways in this country, often more physical. And so I think it's important for us to make sure that we're kind of taking care of the whole person, as you were talking about. I always sort of look back at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Right. You start from your security all the way up to your self-actualization. Right. And the longing is in the middle of that pyramid. And I don't think we need to look much further to that to see what areas do we need to focus on, because they're all mapped out for us. Sorry.
No. I was just talking about the experience, right? I think I would want to touch back on some of the points you also mentioned regarding the kids, raising kids here in this country. For me, that's one of my favorite topics as well. Because for those of us, or those of you that have met me or know me well, if I haven't told you anything about my child, then
we
haven't met me.
You should be, you definitely deserve to be a proud father.
Because I normally say that I'm the best dad and all that kind of stuff. But I think I will touch shortly about that. But before that, I mentioned that my experiences, my experience living here as an African. I think that there is some distinction between us and African Americans. But I want you to elaborate, or just feel free to just comment on that. But I feel that way. But the thing is also that I feel like we Africans in Finland are highly sort of isolated.
Right.
Yeah. So it's not a question of. Do you know that in Finland, I've been in this country for that much long, or I've even lived in Finland more than I've lived in my own country. Okay?
Wow.
But part of this is that there was a day, this is funny but it's true. There was a day I went to, my daughter came in from London, so we went to get some food to eat. And the folks there in this iguana place, so so I'm frequenting the place, and so almost all the chefs and all the people working there knows me. So as we were grabbing food, and this guy, we've been talking for some long time. We always greet and all that kind of stuff. He said, "By the way, where are you from? I've never even asked, like." I'm like, "Okay, I'm from Cameroon." And my child was just standing beside me, right? And my dad she was 7. She was like in a shock, like, "Dad, what did you say?" So I acted as if it was a slip of tongue. Right? At that moment. What did you hear me say? He said, "You said you're from Cameroon." I said, "Okay. Yeah, I think I probably made a mistake." So what was actually, I just told the guy that I'm Cameroonian. Think about that.
Yeah.
Because I never feel comfortable to tell anyone in this country that I'm a Nigerian.
Wow.
Yeah. Right? So in UK, I'm easily like, "Yeah, I'm a Nigerian." But here, before you say it, you are done. So that was how I was carrying myself. And it was really, really hard until that incident happened. And from that day, I learned from that mistake never to. So I begin to tell people now, my nationality, that I'm a Nigerian, because it's just like in here and other Nordic countries as well. As soon as you open your mouth to say you are a Nigerian, right? That's it. The next thing, like you drop from let's say 10 to 0.
It's this topic. That's a favorite topic of mine. So one, how is the dynamics between African Americans and Africans, and then two, sort of the perception of Africa in Finland. So when I was in the startup community, I was helping startups make traction in Nigeria, in African countries, specifically Nigeria, and Tanzania and South Africa. And so I was lucky enough to get to go to Lagos for a week, and I called my insurance agent and said, "Hey, I need some travel insurance. I'm going to Nigeria." And he was like, "You cannot go to Nigeria." I'm like, "Why? Why not? There's gonna be a terrorist attack." And I had literally had to like jump on Google and go terrorism in Nigeria, because I actually was not aware that there has been some terrorists. And I'm like, look, this is isolated in the north. It's a small group that does cause some problems. But in Lagos, in Abuja, where the capital is, it's completely, it's really actually pretty safe.
Yeah.
And again, coming from the U.S., I get this question a lot. Like, well, how can you go to these dangerous countries? I'm like, the most dangerous country I go to is my own. Right? I never feel like my life isn't under threat until I go home. Right? And this is not just from someone like Troy, who I would consider a brother. This can be from the police. So, I mean, that was one thing the Trump era sort of exposed, is that, we think countries are safe and they're not. The countries we think are unsafe are actually pretty safe.
Right.
Uber worked better in Lagos than it does in Finland.
Wow.
There's services there that work better than work here. But all we get to see is the negative side of African countries. And so, this, and I actually blame us and Africans for allowing this perception to permit. Because when I was in Lagos, I even posted pictures of how beautiful the city was in certain areas, like the Opera House. Lagos has an opera house, right? Most people don't think of this. This place is beautiful. I posted pictures and I had Nigerians going, "Where's this?" And I'm going, "This is your country." How can you let the world not know that there is an opera house of this beauty and magnitude in your home country, and a lot of times your home state and your home city? And I post pictures of Tanzania and of their business district, and people are like, "Wow, where is this?" It's Dar es Salaam.
Yes.
And because unfortunately the UN has been very good, and UNICEF and some of these other entities of showing the negative side of Africa,
right?
It hasn't shown the positive side of Africa.
And you're bringing up a really good point.
Nigeria has 220 million people. It has one of the largest economies in the world, and in the next 50 years, it will be in the top 5 economies in the world.
That is
right.
That
and Finns don't know that.
If Nigeria still exists, but anyway,
it will exist. Yes, please, it will exist. South Africa will be just behind it, and so will Tanzania. And so we are allowing this perception that Africa, as a continent, and the countries within it, are all, look like the UNICEF pictures.
Right.
And that is not reality. And now people are mad at China because China is investing in Africa in such a big way. Why? Because they know that the major growth is going to happen in Africa. Right? There's already 1 billion plus people on the continent. Right? So if you looked at it collectively, it would be as big as India and China, both. Right? Nigeria is going to double in the next 20 to 30 years. There's going to be 450 million Nigerians.
See, there is no doubt about, how great Nigeria is and how great Nigeria could be.
Right.
I think the problem is that, of course, with all these perceptions, there's also an element of
there's the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I thought it was a very interesting point that you brought up, because now, with kind of like the democratization of information, of social media, we can begin to take charge of the narrative.
Yes.
Right. So take control of the narrative, because when we think about like the perception, let's say the perception that Nigerians have, it's not much different than the perception that African Americans have in the United States. And of course we can look at the genesis of where that started, with slavery, and how that progressed into essentially legalized slavery through the 13th Amendment. But let's take it to where how we started to get painted ugly in the media. At one point, the media that told our story for us, and that spun the narrative that that we were criminals and this and that and the other thing, that was run by conglomerates.
Yeah.
And nowadays, I think we have the opportunity to bring it full circle. We have the opportunity to take charge of the narrative.
True.
Begin to start telling our own story.
True.
Right?
Right. The things that you do for not just the Nigerian startup world and finished businesses going to Nigeria, but all over. Those are the stories that need to be
Sure. That's so true.
Right. That's we have to rewrite the narrative for immigrants here in Finland now, as well as we need to rewrite the narrative for the impact that African society will have globally.
That's so true. And that's also like, when I sometimes, I get frustrated, in terms of how the society here look at us, and because it would have been much more beneficial and better if they look at you and say, okay, I see you tried.
Yep.
Right? There's difference to that than looking at people and just thinking that, okay, you're just here, you're just a liability, and we don't need people like you here and all that kind of stuff. And when you hear about inclusion, right? This is the word that they've been throwing up and down. It has nothing to do with us. So when they talk about inclusion and diversity and all that kind of thing, Africa is not in the picture, because we are the group of people here in Finland that no one sees, like we're completely isolated and no one sees us. Yeah, we're invisible. So the only time they will see us is when something is wrong. They want to highlight that, okay? But of course, it's also one of those things that pushes me up in the morning, because I think that we can change that by our attitude, by how we carry ourselves, and then of course how we pull ourselves together to actually make progress, because that's the only way we could change those perspectives and that's also
I was gonna say, like, this podcast is an example of how we change the narrative. We have to be responsible for telling our own story. And that's why, one of the things I respect about you most. I do a lot of things for business-wise, but I am not positively promoting the diaspora like you've done through your podcast.
Actually, with that, I have, or not I, but it's just an initiative that came from me. I'm actually connecting with the guys from, Sweden, Denmark.
Awesome.
This week we will finalize the concept, and then we'll have a couple of partners that want to come in. The whole idea is around diaspora, the African diaspora. Because if the EU, the Western countries are saying, for Africa also to prosper, which we know already, that the diaspora has to play an important role. Now, how can we play an important role if they don't actually recognize us here, if they don't do anything to enhancing our competencies, if they don't do anything to make sure that skill-wise we are up to the level that we can deliver value back home to our individual countries. So those are something that I just sort of figure out that, okay, now who is engaging, who is actually putting these things together and saying, talking to authorities, that all platforms or individuals that are willing to help. Because I know there are people, Nordic people that actually have really, really interest in making sure that, something positive happen or begin to happen in Africa. So my job now is actually, because again, you can't do a lot on your own. So I need to build a coalition of people, with like-minded individuals that are actually willing to say, okay, we see you guys, we recognize that, you could be valuable. So how can we put these things together so that we begin to make those steps? So that's something that I'm working on. And good. Now, I think we'll have those. I could share more information on that. Definitely. So that you guys could see where we are. Hopefully, we could join hands and push it further.
Absolutely, whatever's needed.
There is, Reggie mentioned about, his kids, right?
Mhm.
So you have a son, right?
Yes.
Is that correct, right?
Yes.
How old is your son?
He's 11.
11, yeah. I
Some
have
late,
16,
yeah.
and yours is 8, right? So there is this report about people of African descent in sort of underperforming. I don't know what that means, but there was a story about it, and it's been going on also now. So that itself, I kind of feel a bit, uneasy with that. So I want to. Did you hear anything about it? And what about you? No?
So I've heard a little bit about it, and I would say this is an area where African Americans, we've sort of dealt with these things where maybe in Nigeria you would have dealt with it in a different way because you didn't have you were always the majority, and there was almost an exclusive majority. There was no other minority when you were growing up. And so Troy and I went through school systems where we were the minority, and in Finland our kids are the minority. So like I could see right away when the school system was treating my son like I would have been treated in the U.S. system, and that's how this underperforming perception gets put in place, and then that's how the system starts to shape this underperformance. Right. So it's a I can see that it's sort of like a step in the maturity continuum. That we ultimately believe that these people are going to underperform, so we will start to change our behavior to almost solidify the underperformance.
Yeah, and then funnel them into opportunities that that align with that performance. Essentially.
And that is, and again, we can't allow our kids to buy into this underperformance mindset. And I can say that I have to thank my family for making sure that I didn't have that sort of underperformance, mindset. I can distinctly remember different parts of my education. I went through public schools, and where they would put me into, as an example, a lower math class than what my performance would dictate. And then, because of some caring teacher, they would go, "What are you doing here? Why are you in this class?" And as a 5th grader, you'd have to go, "How the hell would I know?" Right? And if they hadn't taken an action to say, "No, you need to be in this class. This is the class that of your performance level," I would have been stuck in that underperforming path.
Right. And in the U.S., you have the tracking system, so you stay on that path, and then that dictates the opportunities that you have later on, whether or not they put you into like maybe vocational classes, and then you're off to a blue collar situation which is nothing wrong. Most of my family is blue collar, but if you're meant to be more on the white collar side of things and go to college and that sort of then you're lost.
Right. So you can have systemic underperformance.
How do we then change this situation? What are the things that you do?
So I've actually worked with the education administration here. One, on trying to develop programs with them, which haven't gone as well as I'd like. Develop programs with them on how to increase the perception of immigrants, because that's actually where it starts. It's going to be really hard for us to change the perception of 35-year-olds even, and as you get older, the chances of changing the perception gets less and less and less. So you have to attack it at the source, and a lot of that, kids are going to be fed a message at home, but they also get fed a message at school. It was brought to my attention that one of the Finnish school books had written in it that, as an example, Reggie is from Nigeria, just since we were picking on Nigeria, and so he must run fast. In the Finnish text.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's really
right. That's how you perpetuate stereotypes and underperformance.
Right.
it didn't say that Reggie's from Nigeria and he is the highest paid robotics engineer in the world, which is actually a true statement. Not for me, but for a Nigerian robotic engineer, right? It doesn't talk about that.
No.
It says, I can run fast. And so we have to be very aware as parents on the information our kids are consuming, even through the normal institutions. And we have to speak up and say, this isn't, I brought this to the Board of Education. Hey, this is not right. Right? We have to get rid of text like this. How can you have diversity and inclusion when you are teaching a message that says, don't really worry about the African community because they're only good at sports?
Yeah, I mean, and we had, I think, probably very similar texts in the U.S. But what I will say is that we were given kind of, a contradictory message in the United States. On the first day of school, usually in your kindergarten or first grade, a message that all kids get is that you can be anything that you want to be. You can even be president of the United States. Now you're 5 or 6 years old, so you actually, I can be president of the United States, or you can be, a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever you want. But then, you go home with this belief, and if you're growing up in the hood like I was, or in bad circumstances, you may look around your neighborhood and say, well, hold up, I could be everything. I could be anything that I want to be, but look at where I'm starting from. But I would say that even though you start to realize the kind of like the inequalities that are part of the fabric of the system, you kind of take that with you. This idea that you can be anything that you want, and this idea of American exceptionalism is something that I do think is valuable, in the sense that that's something that we can pass on to our children. I tell my son, you can be anything that you want to be. And I was telling him that since he was 4. Because when you're that young, you do believe it. Because the world is going to beat you down already. But if daddy and mommy are saying, you can be anything that you want to be, that belief right there is powerful enough to move mountains, in my opinion. And carry you through the storm that this life is inevitably going to descend on.
And then, of course, there's a way to also build this confidence in our kids, so that they trust us, so that they can believe us. Because when that happens, whatever you then tell them, they take it as the gospel. Right? She's 16 now. Anything they tell her.
Question.
And then also, from the beginning, I already made her to believe that, think for yourself. Be a free thinker. Don't take anything for face value. Think for yourself.
Yes.
And that's how, those are the things that I've actually kind of encouraged her to do. And I am happy seeing that those kind of sort of solid things that I put there has taken root. And now she's able to, question things, she's able to think for herself, and even when she sees stuff that doesn't add up, she's able to, make decisions herself.
That's very powerful, thinking for yourself.
So I think, just to, maybe because of time, to round this up, because we're talking about kids, right? How we should, how we should obviously contribute to our children's welfare and well-being in Finland. So what would be your, number one thing that you would give to your child, to you as well?
Again, I think the thinking for yourself message is key. Being well-grounded and believing that he can do and accomplish anything. The thing that I would want to change is that when my son has a non-finished name, and so when that non-finished name gets passed around for different opportunities, I don't want it to be seen with a negative connotation. And that's what I'm working hard to do, is change the narrative on the impact of immigrants in Finland. Because we were bringing quite a large impact to the country.
And Troy, you want to add something to that? Any solid message for your child that could be useful for him and for other kids as well here?
Well, the one thing that I would say to my son is, Do not ever give up, no matter what. And don't deny the fire inside of you. Try to do everything you can in your power to keep that fire lit, because the world is going to do enough to try to snuff it out. Don't let the world do it.
Excellent. And then that sounds like
Yeah, good closing words.
yeah. But of course, if there's other point, of course, because of time, if there's other things, other point you want to just quickly.
No, I think this was good.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I'm sure we could take other topics and go deep on those as well.
Absolutely.
I'm enjoying this.
Yes,
you know?
it's good. It's a
That's
good,
great.
passionate discussion.
Yeah, but yeah, this is really interesting discussion, and I'm happy that you guys made out the time to do this. Let's continue, and hopefully we're able to, build this coalition to help as many as possible.
Yeah.
To do better, to live better, to make progress. Because this, at the end, this is what it all comes down to. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate you setting it
It
up.
was
Yeah.
really a pleasure.